Good morning and welcome to a meeting of the New York City Conflicts of Interest Board. The open meeting item on our agenda this morning is something I've not seen, but under the provisions of the New York City Charter's Administrative Procedure Act, an individual or body can petition or request any agency to consider a rulemaking. And under these rules, the agency is bound to consider the petition and make a decision in 60 days whether to proceed with the rulemaking or not. And if the agency does not, to state the reasons it does not. This case is a petition from the minority leader of the City Council, Stephen Matteo, and he is petitioning for essentially an amendment to our rules governing when it is that one ceases city employment for the applicability of the one-year restriction or ban on appearing before an agency. So I think, Ethan, you analyze this and have a recommendation, and why don't you present this to the board?
Certainly. Right, as you said, Councilmember Matteo has petitioned the board to amend this rule section, which defines the end of a public servant's city service, which is usually clear enough, but sometimes has some ambiguity. And it's presently defined in the rule, which is a codification of at least the concepts of Advisory Opinion 9811. The rule now defines it as being the later of when the public servant ceases to perform work for the city and when the public servant ceases to receive benefits conditioned on current employment. And Councilmember Matteo has identified that this causes some issue with councilmanic staff who are on terminal leave that is being paid out over time for their unused annual sick and compensatory leave because the City Council also continues to provide them with health insurance benefits and continuing pension accrual. And so obviously that would arguably causes a delay in both the beginning and the end of the beginning of the one-year post-employment communication ban. In looking at what an amendment might look like if the board chose to amend the rule, and in researching the answer to a question from a board member about the legal basis for the City Council continuing to provide these benefits, in particular the pension benefits, I communicated with very recently, since preparing this for the board, communicated with the law department, OLR, DCAS, and city payroll. As it turns out, this continuation of health insurance benefits and continued pension accrual is normal for terminal leave. And that in fact, the description of terminal leave in Advisory Opinion 9811 is not quite accurate, and that misapprehension has been essentially copied into the new board rule. The law department expresses their regret for missing this when they reviewed the rule, as do I. But the law department recommends that we amend this rule. It doesn't think it's a complicated fix. I agree. I also recommend we amend the rule. I also think it's not a difficult fix. The little bit of the challenge is just trying to figure out if we don't base this on benefits, how we also make sure we're capturing people correctly in terms of people who are on long-term unpaid leave and other situations that might otherwise create some ambiguity about the date of termination of city service. But in my conversations with the law department yesterday, we see several options that seem entirely workable for fixing that. So that would be my recommendation. We don't need to the board does not need to get into the details of what the new rule would look like today. As the chair said, the only decision that needs to be made today is whether to move forward with an amendment, which again, I would recommend.
So this practice then is broader than just the council. So
correct. The council differs from the rest of the city, it appears, in that the council provides terminal leave to all of its employees, whereas the rest of the city does that only for non-managerial employees. Managerial employees are paid their leave in a lump sum, and so they don't have, as a result, they're not in a terminal leave status and don't get the continuing benefits that are otherwise conditioned on current city employment. It appears that, at least as a matter of, as DCAS's policy views this, employees who are in this terminal leave status are still on the active payroll. But I don't think that for Chapter 68 purposes, that is, I don't think for purposes of trying to determine when the post-employment restriction should begin, that's necessarily the best place to draw the line. But we can get into all the details about how to do that if and when we engage in an amended rule.
we would decide today, I guess, whether to grant the petition.
Correct.
And the petition, and in doing that, we're not stating precisely what that rule would be, but that we are accepting the petition to consider a change in that rule.
Indeed, if the board chooses to respond by saying that it will initiate rulemaking, it just needs to say by what date it will do so.
And how do we define initiate rulemaking for this?
I believe that it would mean holding the first open meeting about the rule.
Could I interject there? I was struck by, and by the way, on the substance, a nice work. I wondered whether the council exception might in fact not be an exception, but really the rule. I'm a little puzzled about the managers, but that's not getting into the weeds on the details. But on the process, as to Jeff's question, I noticed in the charter provision, the CAPA provision in the memo, there's a sentence in there that I don't recall ever having seen that says every agency's got to adopt a rule for the process to undergo when responding to one of these petitions. It says that in so many words. I don't believe we've got such a rule. I'm guessing that some city agencies must, and/or the law department's got something to say about it. And maybe that process could be helpful to us here, and maybe serve as a prelude to a rule that we make. But as to its usefulness here, we just see what other agencies have done, and I suspect anybody that's adopted one is probably identical to any that anybody else has adopted, and just use that as a way to go, or maybe a way not to go, but at least look to what best practice might be.
Sure, yeah, happy to do so. I think this is really only the second time the board's been petitioned, and so the need for rules governing that, I think, hasn't been a pressing issue. But yeah, I think you're right. We can certainly look at that, and that may be using the method you recommend might be a very easy thing to do as well.
So what would you propose as a resolution for this board to adopt?
I'd draft a letter for your signature, for the chair's signature, to respond to Leader Matteo, just saying that the board will if the board chooses to, that the board will initiate rulemaking. I would suggest saying that we would do so initiate in 2 or 3 months, just to give us the time to make sure that we do our due diligence and do the work that Wayne has just suggested. I think the last time the board did this, they actually gave themselves something like, Carolyn might remember exactly, but 6 or 8 months. to initiate the rulemaking. That was on a much more complicated question. I don't think we need anywhere near that much lead time for this question. But you know, a couple or three.
And if I remember, we're not really committing ourselves to promulgate a rule, although I think it'd be wise here, because if I remember in that case, we ended up saying, the board said, we're not going to do anything.
Yeah,
is that pretty much the end of it?
You're entirely correct. The last time the board was petitioned, it held a number of open meetings and I believe some public hearings about the question that was at issue, and concluded that in fact, if I understand correctly, that it either didn't have the authority to promulgate the rule that was being requested, or that it was. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the result, because I'm fairly certain that the subject to that ended up being a proposal for a charter revision in the 2009 proposal that the board made.
But in terms of when we do this and the timing, is it not important to do this promptly? Because what in fact brings this petition on is the concern that many council employees will be leaving soon, certainly at the end of the term, and many may jump ship earlier as opportunities become available. So we want this to be in place so that they can take advantage of it. And also, we've got to count, I guess, not only when we begin, but the time it takes, which is not inconsiderable, it's not a long time, between the time we decide to go forward with the rule and the time the rule becomes effective. You know, the hearing process, the notice process, the 30-day delay at the end. So we're talking, you know, a few months, these 2-3 months in the process. So we'd want this to take effect as soon, and maybe we should, if you count back from next, I guess, December. I mean, you want this to be in effect, I would think, but by the end of the summer, certainly, or maybe even sooner.
Right. The date is a not later than date, right? So I don't want to promise that we'll start before we can, but as I said, the law department and I both think that an amendment is likely an easy thing to do. Obviously, whether the board has to be satisfied with what that's going to look like, but which is to say, I don't. If the board said that it would initiate in a couple of months, within a couple of months, I wouldn't be surprised if we significantly were ahead of that deadline. But I just want to make sure we're giving ourselves the time to do the due diligence we need to do, and that we're not replacing one problem with another.
Mm-hmm. Could the letter say we would do this within a couple of months, which would be, I guess, by the end of May, but say also that the board appreciates the need to resolve this issue, given the political calendar, and that we will endeavor to do this as soon as we can. I mean, give that as an outside date and say we're mindful of this, and we would entertain this as soon as we can do this. We will do it.
Yeah, certainly we can express that, and we can wordsmith the letter to get it just as you like.
Yeah, because the concern is, we say we'll do it in a certain amount of time. I don't want them to come back and say, well, we need this sooner because people are leaving. We don't want delays. So I think if we indicate in the letter, one, give us the option of taking the 2 months. But if we don't need it, to do it sooner, and let them know we are aware of the need for expedition,
mm-hmm.
And so we don't get sort of blowback on that, since we are in fact going forward with the petition as requested.
Well, on the pressure point, Ethan, on the second issue that the council member raises, maybe this is a moment to discuss that.
No, certainly. Right. So the second question that Councilmember Matteo has raised is sort of how to apply this rule, or whether this rule should be applied to councilmanic staff who have left prior to the rule being promulgated, and asks that essentially some of the other factors that were considered in Advisory Opinion 9811 be used for governing that. You know, essentially things like having ceased performing work, and you know, doesn't have the employee doesn't have the ability to return to city service without being formally rehired, or a couple of other concepts that are within that advisory opinion. You know, perhaps that's you know, perhaps the way to respond is to say that the board would generally advise that councilmanic staff use that as the guide. And since we've now learned that this is actually going to be an issue for all public servants who are on terminal leave, or at least most of them, that might be the right guidance in the interim, that essentially the board would cease enforcement of that part of this rule section, the part about the benefits, and focus instead just on the remaining part of that rule section, that the public servant has ceased work in the interim while this rulemaking is going on. Since I think, Jeff, you're entirely right that not only councilmanic staff are going to be leaving in the next several months, but I imagine we'll start to see, as the administration changes, people around city government leaving.
Yeah, but most of them will be managers, though. Unlike the council, where everybody goes.
Right. True.
I'd be interested in what it's the thing you alluded to before. What distinguishes terminal leave, if there really is such a thing, from a leave of absence? I mean, what is it that, in theory, gives you a right to return from the one but not the other? You know, it's probably the thing you really only learn in litigation, and maybe the people at Labor and Employment would know. But somebody who says, you know, I'm retiring, or I'm quitting, I'm about to take my leave, but then halfway through that, you know, say 3-4 month period, they got a lot of leave. They say, hey, it's not so rosy out here. I'm still on payroll. I'm bringing my plants back, you know, and my plaques. You know, presumably you don't have a right to do that, but why not? Where somebody could be on, you know, these DOE in particular, I think it's got really long maternity, paternity leaves, and so somebody comes back, got a right to come back 2 or 3 years later. So anyhow, food for thought.
Yeah, no, I think that right. That's exactly what obviously the AO 9811 was in part concerned with, and certainly what this board rule section was aimed at trying to resolve. My discussions with the law department suggest that there are some, you know, we can find some other indicia of how to distinguish when someone's on a long leave of absence rather than on terminal leave. And it's just a matter of making sure that we've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's on getting that distinction just right. But yes, that's the distinction we want to make.
And arguably say, hey, who really cares past a year anyhow about a person on unpaid leave, and maybe just say they are former public servants. I don't know, but if that's a fallback, if you couldn't think of any other way to handle it. But again, substance. But Jeff, I think you're absolutely right to send a signal to the council that we're aware of this and don't intend any we don't intend any unintended consequences here to single out these council people and put them in a disadvantage to have to wait an extra 3 or 4 months for their clock to run before they can appear back before the council.
So if the board wants to move forward with the amendment, then I would draft that response and circulate it to the board for review.
Okay, and we could do that pretty quickly, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that would be my preference. Do we all agree?
Sounds good.
Yeah, I think this is
Agreed.
okay.